Michelle Brake. I'm an Enterprise Solutions Specialist here at Esri Canada, and I'm joined by my colleague, John Osborne, who's a Solutions Architect. Thanks for the wave, John. Today's agenda, to start, we're going to be covering some highlights from ArcGIS Enterprise 10.9.1, as well diving into ArcGIS Enterprise 11 with some map viewer and portal updates, some beta functionality that's been introduced with service webhooks, as well as the ArcMap runtime removal. Now, before we get started, one thing we do want to check in with you is what version of ArcGIS Enterprise you're using. Are you using 11? You've already made that leap. Are you on 10.9.1, maybe 10.9, any 10.8.1, 10.8, maybe 10.7.1? Now, if you're on 10.7 and below, we may want to have a chat just because that is edging into the retired and mature support categories. Or maybe you're not using ArcGIS Enterprise. Maybe you're new, testing out the waters, or you're joining us from the ArcGIS Online territory. Everyone, we're happy to have you here today. We just want to get a sense of who's using what.
We're definitely seeing some people here that have upgraded from that are at 10.9.1, 10.7.1 as well. We're going to talk a little bit about upgrading later. So we'll let you know what release you need to be at if you really want to get to 11. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But it looks like a number of people have moved on to 10.9.1, which is great because that is our current long-term release. But that's why don't you continue there, Michelle?
Yeah. So to start, we're going to cover some of what the latest and greatest hits were at 10.9.1, starting with the map viewer, which was formerly known as map viewer beta. It was introduced as a separate install with 10.8.1 and 10.9. But at 10.9.1, we saw this release of ArcGIS Enterprise having it already installed with Portal. We also saw a new experience for adding content with a new item and create app buttons being available on your content pages, as well as drag and drop functionality, allowing you to add content directly from your desktop. Also, with ArcGIS dashboards, we saw the introduction of our next generation version, which was built using the ArcGIS API for JavaScript 4.x. We also saw the option to disable the ArcMap service runtime during upgrades and installations, and this could be disabled during or after those upgrades. In this release, we also saw ArcGIS Notebook Server, which can now be executed when a webhook is triggered. And administrators could configure webhooks to automatically run a notebook when events such as portal item changes, groups, or users were occurring. ArcGIS Knowledge was a new introduction, which allowed you to create knowledge graphs in ArcGIS Enterprise with ArcGIS Pro. And a knowledge graph allows you to construct a model that simulates a real-world system. And this was a new server role for ArcGIS Knowledge, as well as a new data store, the Graph Store, was introduced. We also saw increased cloud data warehouse support with Google BigQuery, Snowflake, and AWS Redshift. But diving into ArcGIS Enterprise 11, we're going to start with the map viewer. And this release saw new functionality as well as changes to the interface. And Map Viewer Classic is still available for use in ArcGIS Enterprise 11, but it's no longer the default for creating your web maps in your organization. And within this update, we have a lot of the functionality coming from ArcGIS Online, particularly from these three releases. In September of 2021, we saw the introduction of layer effects, charts, improved support for OGC layers, performance improvements from updates to the 4.x JavaScript API. In December 2021, saw the introduction of feature-specific effects, editing source HTML of pop-ups, more color ramps, sketch layers, and label enhancements, as well as the ability to add GeoJSON directly to maps. And then March of 2022 saw the introduction of Flow Smart Mapping styles, as well as base map projection switching, editing enhancements like snapping, the ability to duplicate feature layers, and having nested group layers. Now, all of this moving into our version of Map Viewer with ArcGIS Enterprise 11, we see new layer effects. And these allow you to dramatically add visual effects to the layers in your map. With drop shadow or bloom or blur, you can add cartographic touches to your map and give prominence to overlapping layers using bloom, or communicate fuzzy boundaries using blur. We saw, or will see, new pop-up enhancements go building on our existing functionality, and users can create custom information displays by editing and displaying HTML in pop-ups. And Map Viewer also includes enhanced imagery layer support, including the ability to configure pop-ups and apply raster function templates. As well, there's some charts that we're going to be able to take a look at. Now within Map Viewer, we have 4 types of charts: bar charts, line charts, scatter plots, and histograms. And these will help you uncover patterns, trends, and relationships within your data. Sketch layers are one of my favorite things that we're going to take a look at, and these allow users to interactively add features to their maps, such as a line, a polygon, a stamp, or even some text through a pop-up or text directly on the map. Everything that was covered in those 3 ArcGIS online updates is all of the functionality you're going to see within the new Map Viewer at ArcGIS Enterprise 11. But from here, we're going to get started with our first demo. And what we're going to take a look at here are specifically the new layer effects, charts, as well as the sketch layer. I'm going to do some screen choreography here and switch over. So starting off in the map here, we have a few different layers, one of them being the study area demographics, as well as the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority's damage centers or high-risk flood areas. And CLOCA, which is the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, works within their watershed to monitor water levels and flood status, and this work includes community outreach and education. In utilizing this data, CLOCA needs to help their decision makers decide where should we focus that education and outreach. Typically, looking at our data, the first thing I'd want to do with our demographic data in the blue would be to alter the transparency of the layer. I'd come into our style options, from our symbol style, adjust the transparency. We don't need anything too drastic, but about a 20% is already a big difference. Typically, this is what we would have started with, maybe a few other changes to transparency, but now we have layer effects, and they're really going to do a lot of the work for us with a few light changes. So now choosing our damage centers, we're going to choose effects, and we can start to play around with some things to make our flood areas pop, specifically those yellow, orange, and red areas. We have bloom. We're getting a neon effect, and we can turn this all the way up and really have them stand out. But for our purposes, bringing it down to about a 1.5 is enough of a glow to stand out. We have drop shadow. Again, nothing too drastic, but maybe if we change it to a white, interesting, gives it a bit of a halo effect. Maybe not quite what we're going for because of the bloom already being neon. I think the black really helps to accentuate it. But I will drop that down to about a 1.5, just so it's not as bold. And some great things though about the effects is that you can reset to default on a click. As well, there's an option to automatically adjust them to scale. But there's a few other things in here that we can start playing with: contrast and color, grayscale. But I want to use the blur actually to look at our study area demographics, maybe just dim them down a little bit. Off, not a large change, but enough that it's not standing out as much. And the great thing about the blur functionality is that we can still interact with the data underneath, including our pop-ups, without any loss of functionality. Other things, you could apply a grayscale. Already our data is popping, but maybe not for today. You could do a hue rotate and start to play around with some of the different color options. Or you could invert it completely. But very similarly to what we're working with now, we could add a sepia tone. But I'm happy with what we're doing here already. One thing I do want to look at though is maybe turning off those reference layers in our base map. With this being an organization that's familiar with their area, having the reference layer there isn't something that's necessarily of concern for them, but it's still here if we want to turn it back on later. Now, our data is looking great, but I do want to let our stakeholders know where exactly should they be looking when they come into our map. And that's where sketch layers will come into play. So we can add a sketch from the right-hand bar. We can add a stamp or a line. For our case, a rectangle will do. But I'm also going to turn off the fill, because I don't want there to be any white cast or any color distorting what we're looking at, but I am going to increase the width. Oh, made a mistake, but luckily, by coming over to our select, we can easily delete them. Though I do want to add in a second box over here. And again, turning off that fill and increasing the width of the line. And the great thing about these is we're able to play with them and move them around. They're not a put them on, having to remake them as we go. But another great thing about them is that we can also add text to their pop-ups. And these stay with the map. So rather than having your users needing to publish a sketch layer to your server or portal as an item, this lives within the map. So there's no permission issues, and it continues with it as the map moves along through different stakeholders. Enabling pop-ups again, adding in our text. Looking great. One last thing I want to do though is add in a chart so that when our stakeholders come in, they have an understanding of where are those higher risk demographic areas, specifically, where might there be high density with renting and a higher median age. So people that may require a little more assistance in the event of a flooding. So choosing our study area demographics, we'll come over. There's some great functionality that's been added at this version that you may want to come take a look at after, like creating forms directly from your map, but we're going to configure a chart. We're going to add a chart. We're going to choose a scatter plot, choosing our data. For our x-axis, we're going to go with the median age, and for our y-axis, rented. Now coming into here, I have an idea of around where does some of our data sit. So choosing this option here of a median age of 60 and a half, a number of renters, we can see it's at the edge of our study area. And this is one of those areas that we may want to focus on. Now, with our charts, with our sketch layers and our data all there, we're ready to hand this over to decision makers so they can figure out where do we need to focus our work next. And with that, we're going to take a second to take a look at some questions, and then we'll move on to what's next with Map Viewer. John, any questions in the chat?
No, there are a few, just answering right now.
I see, Candace, you have a great question about symbol settings and can you save them for other layers? You do have the option to save styles with a layer, and you could download those styles and apply them to other layers as well. A couple other questions there that we'll circle back to after. Going on with Map Viewer though, we also have something called the flow renderer. Now at this version of ArcGIS Enterprise, we have the flow renderer, which is a specific way to visualize the magnitude and direction of data in imagery layers. And this option appears as a smart mapping option if you have tiled imagery layers or dynamic imagery server tiles that contain magnitude and direction data. UV or MAGDIR raster data sets are popular in meteorology, hydrology, climatology, and oceanography. And these are specifically looking at wind speeds and currents. So if you don't have this kind of data on hand, the Living Atlas has data sets to get you started. look for the source data type, vector magdir or vector UV, as seen in the pictures on our slide here. Now, static maps are great for showing snapshots in time, but the world is dynamic and complex. And we're constantly changing. So when we want to know how things are changing and where things are moving, map animation makes this task easier. Humans are wired to see motion and infer information based on speed, to see magnitude. Now, and that's all happening in front of our eyes. With animation, just a few seconds of it, we can communicate a vast amount of information with only a few clicks. And within our flow renderer, we do have two different visualization styles, flowline and wavefront. If you think of flowline as the head of the arrow, wavefront is just flowline is the body of the arrow and waveline is the head of the arrow. Flowline will show us the direction and the area that data has covered, while wavefront is meant to mimic a shock wave or a wavefront across a surface. Now, going into a demonstration, we're going to take a look at what does flowline and wavefront really look like, maybe which one you may want to choose for your data. So coming into our map, we're going to start with some daily wind data throughout the United States, and then we're going to move to look at some sea ice off the coast of Antarctica. But starting with our daily wind, this is a great base map, but something we're going to look at as we apply the flow renderer option is what happens if we use a dark base map. The dark gray canvas is a great option, or one of my personal favorites is the Nova map, will really help our data pop. With daily wind still selected, we're going to come over to styles. With smart mapping options, Map Viewer already knows to give us the flow option. Clicking on it, already a bit of a dramatic change. Coming into our style options, we can increase the speed. I'm okay with it being about on the lower side. You can change the density. Personally, I like to give the lines a little more breathing room, but you can increase them. Or the length. We can go long lines to really see how far is something traveling, or shorter lines to see that more dynamic speed of data. Keep in mind, these are all options that you're tailoring yourself. They're not connected directly to your data, but what is altering our color ramp. And this is able to pull in those values from your data set to use within your color. Now, this is a great option, but let's look for something with a little bit more of a difference in the colors. This green one's pretty cool. If we start to adjust the scale on this range here, we see that we're getting some darker colors over here in the center of the US. As well, some of the interesting things that are happening with the data from the flow line, we can see that down here near Atlanta, up to Philadelphia, that the wind is almost going around something. Through here is the Appalachian Mountain Range. So it makes sense to see kind of a gap through that data as it hugs the mountain range heading up. As well, on the coast of San Francisco, we can see that the wind is hugging the edge of the coast as it goes up. And this is how we can use the flow renderer to help us tell a story and really animate our data. Now, I did say earlier, if we choose a dark base map, there's something cool that happens. And that's the option for layer effects. They're automatically enabled for us. And like we saw in our last one, we have that bloom, which is that neon effect. Turning it off, it's still a dynamic story, but that little bit of neon on the dark base map does help it pop. Now that we've had a look at flowline, let's take a look at wavefront. Zoom to the data set, just here off the coast of Antarctica. Choose my sea ice layer, and we'll go back to styles. From here again, flow is an option for us. And this is already pretty neat in terms of having the flow line, but we want wavefront. It creates a sparkle effect almost. Now, the reason for this is because the length of the lines is set to be short. Lengthening them, already a different story. As well, I'm going to reduce the density a little bit. Looking pretty good. And finally, we'll alter the color ramp. And again, this is where your data comes in handy. Let's choose this blue and yellow. Not a whole lot of color variation going on, but as we change the slider, it starts to tell a bit of a different story. And this is where you'll have a chance to come in, try out what works for your data, and see what's telling the story that you need to tell. That covers our updates for Map Viewer. Any questions before we head on into some portal updates? Harry, I see you have a question about the sketch layer. So the sketch layer isn't saved outside the map. It lives with the map itself. It's not shareable between different maps, but that is a great idea and would be a great option to go into the ideas within the Esri community forum. I see Alex has a question here about this animation speed being adjusted to feature value. To my knowledge, it is based on those individual sliders and not something tied to your data, but that's something that we'll take a look at offline and see if there might be anything there. But in the meantime, I do recommend throwing that up as an option within the GIS ideas on the Esri community. I see Renzo had a question about what type of data structures that we should be using for the flow effect. And I will take us back a slide just to highlight again that it's the vector, magdir, and vector UV. These are imagery tile layers that you'll publish to an imagery server. There's a few examples out there in the Living Atlas, as well as an Esri blog covering what you may want to use and some examples. With that, we'll move on for now, but I'll have a chance to go back and answer some of your questions while John talks in a few minutes. So, user and content management. ArcGIS Enterprise 11 has improved workflows to make user and content management easier for administrators. And there have been improvements to tile layer resampling and response caching, increased cloud data warehouse support, and new publishing experiences for scenes, feature layers, and feature layer views. Now, one of the first things we're going to talk about are hierarchical categories for organization members. These allow administrators to organize members of their organization by various characteristics. You can now set up these categories to have group members grouped together by department, location, and expertise. And once these categories are configured, administrators and members with the correct privileges can filter the list of members by member category, which is also displayed on the members user settings page. And this characterization further helps organize your members with relevant information and eases privilege management work for administrators. We have a new experience for creating feature layer views or feature layers. And within the portal, this workflow is now making it a little bit easier to create. So within a single feature layer, you can have multiple features of different types, including lines, points, polygons, or a table. And as well, you immediately, after creating it, get directed into being able to add fields to your data. We also have a new hosted feature layer view creation experience. And this allows you, whether you're creating a view from hosted feature layers in a relational or spatial temporal data store, to work directly within the new user experience panel. This includes creating the definition part of the view as part of the creation process. And you can still go and alter that later from your hosted feature layer items detail page, but now you can do it right in the creation of the view itself. And with that, pass it over to John, and I'll take a look at your questions while he goes through his part.
Yeah, I'm hoping you can see the slides right now. I knew I was still on mute.
Looks
Um,
great.
okay, great, thanks. All right, well, thank you very much, Michelle. That was great. Up next, what we're going to do is discuss some important new features in ArcGIS Enterprise pertaining to sharing and collaboration. Now, in previous releases of Enterprise, you needed an administrator to transfer the ownership of content between users. And and that could be quite problematic at times, especially since you usually needed that dedicated resource in order to do some of that work. But to reduce the administrative overhead of moving content between these members, two new privileges have been added at 11 to allow non-administrative users to perform this task. Now, the first privilege, reassign content, allows a non-administrative user to transfer that ownership of their own content to another member of the organization. Now, in turn, the member receiving ownership of that content must be assigned the second privilege, receive content, for that transfer to succeed. Now, using these two privileges together, it's going to allow you to support more workflows like data transfer without having to grant administrative privileges unnecessary. So again, this allows you to still maintain some level of control while giving people the ability to move content around between themselves so that they can actually do their job a lot quicker and a lot easier. Now, also when distributed collaboration was first introduced, and I know Mike and I have done a number of presentations about this, and this is a common question. Does it support ArcGIS story maps? Well, now at 11 it does. It was originally omitted from that ability to share content with distributed collaboration, but now at 11, a story map created and published in your enterprise instance can be shared through a distributed collaboration. So what that means is a collaboration can occur between two ArcGIS Enterprise instances and share that story map, or between your ArcGIS Enterprise instance and an ArcGIS Online organization. So under the covers, the story map needs to be published. So before it can be shared, it needs to be published. And only the organization that owns the story map can edit it. However, any edits will be copied when the collaboration is synchronized. And if people are asking, is this by reference or by copy? It is by copy. The content will be copied up to ArcGIS Online or to the other ArcGIS Enterprise environment. It's just the owner of that story map is the only, or the owner instance is the only organization that can actually edit that specific story map. Now, actually, this is a topic I'm kind of excited about and really interested in, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it. But it also is something that's been asked for a while now, since it already exists in ArcGIS Online. But the idea here is, and it's in beta right now, is that we want to take a look at something that's called service webhooks. And I'm going to walk you through a little demonstration of a workflow that I think is a valid use case for a service webhook. Before we get into a service webhook, I want to just do a quick review of what a webhook is. Now, a webhook is a common pattern typically used by many cloud and on-prem enterprise systems today. ArcGIS Online currently uses them. In fact, Enterprise already has a few, which we'll talk about at releases pre-11. Now, the webhook receiver is a user-defined HTTP callback, or simply a web service that can receive a message encoded as a JSON string. The webhook receiver subscribes to specific ArcGIS Enterprise events. Now, in the case of a service webhook, which you'll see in my demonstration, this might be when a feature is created or updated. So what's neat here is that now I can be notified when a brand new feature is added to a feature class or to a feature layer in ArcGIS Enterprise, whether it's hosted or it's one that exists in a enterprise geodatabase. I can be notified of that event, which creates a brand new opportunity for a lot of new workflows. Now, after you register your webhook receiver with ArcGIS Enterprise or with an ArcGIS Enterprise feature layer, whenever that event occurs that you're interested in, you're going to get a JSON string that is posted via HTTP post to your webhook receiver, and then you can run whatever logic you need to in order to move the workflow along. Now, the webhook receiver might be something you write yourself in code, or you might use something that I'm going to show you right now in our demonstration, something called an Azure Logic app. And I'm sure you've seen us use these before in some of our other, maybe not logic apps, but other types of visual technologies for building workflows to support workflow type strategies or webhook type workflows. So it's important to mention, though, that our entire platform has been supporting webhooks for a while now. In enterprise and online and our mobile applications, we've had a number of different types of events that you could subscribe to. What's important here is that in many of those other environments, especially in the mobile-based environments, it was the responsibility of the application to manage that webhook. So in this case now, what we want to do is move that logic right into the data so that when something happens in the data, that logic occurs, which means we can support multiple clients without having to actually write brand new code or write a brand new webhook receiver. We can just set it up once and leverage it across multiple clients, which again, we'll talk about in my demonstration. Now, what is new at Enterprise 11 is this ability to subscribe to event notifications that are triggered by an insert, an update and delete operations, or to schema changes on a feature layer. So you add a new field, we can listen for that. If you insert a new row, we can notify a webhook receiver of that. We can also do some work with geoprocessing services. For example, I can have a webhook listen to job completion events on a geoprocessing job, which means we no longer have to poll anymore if we choose not to. Right now, if you want to use a geoprocessing service, you got to keep asking, are you done? Are you done? Are you done? Well, we can switch that now and instead set up a webhook that listens for that response and then performs some action accordingly. So here's some events that a service webhook might be able to can support. So for example, with a feature layer, we can support some of the editing operations. We can support changes to attachments, changes to schema, or changes to the overall definition of the entire feature layer, which might including add a new layer to this particular feature service. On the geoprocessing side, again, you can just be notified when the job completes, whether it's successful or not. So I want to step into a demonstration here, but I want to lay some groundwork first because there's going to be a number of moving parts here that I think I want to get us ready for as I show them to you. So I want to walk through a workflow that's going to focus on an environment that might use multiple GIS clients. So they're going to use field apps, they're going to use Quick Capture or Pro, or even some APIs. So any one of these clients might be used to update a feature layer, maintaining road defects. In our case, we're going to focus more specifically on potholes, but this could apply to any type of road patrol application. That actually, I mean, again, in Ontario, I've commonly seen road patrol type applications that could leverage by using webhooks. Now, the field apps are going to be used by our road patrol crew, and the ArcGIS Pro is going to be used by our GIS team and Python as well. Now, when a defect is reported, in our case, again, a pothole, the work order and the required fix by date needs to be scheduled. And many municipal codes require that if a particular road defect is reported, depending on perhaps the traffic volume or the speed of the specific road it's on, or the size and depth of that particular defect or pothole, the scheduling of that fix has to occur either quickly, or it may be able to take some time. So for example, a high volume road with a rather deep pothole is probably going to have to be done within 4 days. Whereas, maybe in a low traffic area or a crescent or a suburb that doesn't get a lot of traffic, it might take between 7 to 14 days before it can be scheduled to get fixed. Now, once that estimated fix date is determined, we're going to want to notify the field crew and let them know that, hey, this particular new defect's been reported, and you need to actually schedule a crew to get out there and get this fixed. Now, right now, in our environment, this is a manual process. But what we really want to do is take the advantage of webhooks and automate that part around scheduling the work and notifying our work crew to get the job done. So with that, why don't we step into this demonstration here? And I'm going to just get my demo going here. All right. So what you're looking at right now is just a web map that I've created that uses a feature layer. Have I shared it yet? I haven't. There we go. What you're looking at right now is a web map that I've created that has just a defect feature layer in it. Just points for each pothole that has been reported by, again, any number of sources. The source could have been through through a web application or the map viewer itself, or through my quick capture application on the right-hand side here that is used by my road patrol crew. So right now, when a brand new pothole is reported, I don't have an estimated fix date, and I don't have a road crew assigned yet to fix it, or a team yet to fix it. This is going to be a manual process at the moment because someone has to figure out, based on the attributes here, whether or not this can be scheduled for 14 days, 7 days, or 4 days. But I want to change this. I want to automate this workflow a lot better, so that this happens almost as the pothole is reported. And this is where webhooks can really, really help me. So what I've done is I've created a little logic app, an Azure logic app right over here that is going to take in a brand new reported pothole, and it's going to calculate whether or not it needs to be fixed within 4, 7, or 14 days. And it's going to then notify my crew via SMS that they have a brand new work order that they need to look into and work for. Now, before I go through this, there are a few steps I have to follow to get this done. So I want you to kind of join me here as I get my environment set up to support this whole workflow, and then I'm going to show you how it all works. So the very first thing I need to do is I need to configure the feature layer that manages my road defects or my potholes so that it can handle something called change tracking. And what change tracking is a way to basically manage when new edits come in based on timestamps, so that I can take a look at the data, and again, in a hosted layer or in a geodatabase layer, and I can say at this date and time, what new records came in, and it will give me a list of all of those new records. So I need this in order for my webhook to work, because this is what my webhook is going to use to identify these changes. So in order to set this up, right now, because this is still a beta feature in ArcGIS Enterprise, there's no UI to set up change tracking. So I have to use a rather manual REST-based step in order to do this. So to set up change tracking, I need to go to the administrative endpoint for this feature layer. And right now, the only way I'm aware of, or the easiest way, is to simply get to the REST endpoint, the default REST endpoint for it, and then just type in admin between your ArcGIS server instance name, in my case, it's server, and then and REST. And in fact, that is not correct. I put it in the wrong spot. Look at that. It's between the word REST and services, my apologies. So this takes me to the administrative endpoint. And what I need to do is I need to update the definition of this layer. And what I need to update it with is a brand new capability called change tracking. So right now, what this does is this says this feature layer is going to allow a user to create new features, update new features or delete features. Obviously that includes editing. And I'm adding this brand new option here at the end called change tracking. What this is going to do is allow me to see how the data has changed based on timestamps. So this is going to be very useful, but it gives you a very, and this is for both hosted base layers and again, referenced enterprise geodatabase layers. Now I've already set this up, so I'm not going to click update definition. Now I'm ready to at least start the webhook process. So now that that's done, I need to go back to my work order scheduler here because I need to create a brand new webhook. And what this is, again, understanding that this is really just a visual representation of a web service. And this web service has a URL and it knows how to read JSON text that's sent to it. So I'm just going to copy this URL because I need it when I create my brand new webhook to send, to notify this little tool here when changes occurred to my underlying data. So I'm going to go back to my ArcGIS server environment. Now this time, again, because there's still no GUI yet, no UI yet to do this, I need to go to my ArcGIS server administration endpoint. So the last time I went to the feature layers administrative endpoint, I now need to go to the ArcGIS server administrative endpoint to enable these webhooks. And like I said, I'm hoping in the future there will be some easier UIs to do this. Now I have to navigate, and I got to log in again here, but I have to navigate to my service that is going to require a webhook. And as you can see here, this actual service has the change tracking now enabled on it. And I'm going to select webhooks and the word create here, and it's going to allow me to set up and create a brand new webhook. The most important thing I need is the URL I just copied. So this URL is where all the events are going to be sent to. I'm going to give this a name. And now the other thing is I need to listen for specific events. If I select star, I'm basically saying any type of event that it could occur to this feature layer. That includes deletes, updates, inserts, or schema-based changes. I want to know about it. But for this particular workflow, all I care about is when brand new features are created. I'm not going to click create because I've already created this webhook, but this will, and if I click create here, this is going to initialize the webhook and then start sending stuff to my code, to my logic app. So I'm gonna just back out of this. I'm gonna step over to my logic app is now ready. My layer now handles change tracking, and I've configured a webhook to send events to this logic app. So the next thing I need to do is use this. So right here, I have a quick capture application that's running on my phone. It's my pothole reporter application. And what I want to do is so what I have, this quick capture application here just allows me to specify, whether it is a high traffic, medium traffic, or low traffic area. It also gives me some sort of rough estimation as to what the dimensions are of a specific pothole. And I can just add one in the location I'm currently at and submit it to the server. Okay. Did it send? Nope. Okay. Of course, it's not sending now, right? Yeah, let's just try that one more. And just leave this for a second. Come back. There we go, it's sent. Now, it's going to take about 20 seconds for the server to get that message and then notify my Microsoft Azure Logic app here. So while we're waiting, let's take a look at what an example of is when it's worked successfully. And this should work. I don't see why not. You should hopefully see a message up here telling me that I've got a brand new work order shortly. But right now what happens is a JSON text is posted to this HTTP endpoint. It looks something like this, and it has a URL, this changes URL, that tells me how to extract the brand new updates. From there, I can use that URL to retrieve those changes, and eventually I will get a list of, oh, there we go. So it came through. I'll eventually get a list of the changes that have occurred. So in this case, this would have been the edit that occurred when I ran this particular example. And it gives me some details that I need to, I can use to calculate my schedule, because I need to update my estimated date. And I'm going to create a work order ID just so that I can submit this. So all this work happens in this logic app. Really, the magic occurs here where I figure out whether or not it is a sort of a high, medium, or low pothole that needs to be dealt with, and then I schedule it based on that. And then finally, an SMS is sent to my work crew. Now, if I go to on my phone here, and if I go to my messages and just select that brand new message that just came in a few minutes ago, I now have information about a brand new pothole that my road crew can go out and deal with, and it's sent to their phone and they're good to go. And all this is able to happen simply because we can now send events to either your own custom code or logic apps like what we have here that can then process additional workflows and do additional information. And just one last thing, after that edit was created, it went in ahead and scheduled that fix. It now has the date put back into the data. So again, all this happens because we now have the ability to notify other environments that something occurred. So I'm going to keep going because we're getting close. We will take some questions at the end here, but I'm going to just keep going with the rest of our presentation, because there's one more topic that we really want to cover. And the last topic we really want to cover, and I think it's important, is talking about the removal of the ArcMap-based runtime and upgrading your environment moving forward. So how does this removal of the ArcMap-based runtime impact your new or existing ArcGIS Enterprise workflows? Well, what this means is that the pro-based services will be the only ones supported from 11 and on. So that means you're not going to be able to install that ArcMap runtime on 11.0, which is something you could install at 10.9.1, but now at 11.0, that option is no longer there. So you'll no longer be able to publish services from ArcMap. Pro will be the primary tool for publishing services. Or you can use Portal for ArcGIS to create new services, or ArcGIS Server Manager, in an unfederated environment. Existing services that were previously published from ArcMap, they will no longer work until they are migrated to the Pro service runtime. So this can be done by using the Edit Runtime option in ArcGIS Server Manager, or by using the Update ArcMap Services command line tool installed with ArcGIS Server. So if you're performing a fresh install of Enterprise at 11, you will not be able to publish services from ArcMap. Deprecated data sources will no longer work, like Informix and DB2, old raster catalogs. So that means if you're doing work with imagery, you're going to be working with Mosaic data sets. Server object extensions and server object interceptors that you may have written using ArcObjects, those will need to be migrated to the ArcGIS Enterprise SDK. And if you do have existing SOIs and SOEs, you'll need to migrate them to .NET 6.0. And in fact, the .NET extensibility component provided with Enterprise installers will require that .NET 6.0 is installed on the server. I think previously it was 4.8 or 4.7. Now you're going to have 6.0. If you are upgrading an existing enterprise environment to 11, your existing environment will need to be at a minimum of 10.7. So those of you who are at 10.7 and higher, you should be able to upgrade from that point, though we are going to talk about another point shortly about how it's preferred that you get yourself up to 10.9.1. But anything before 10.7, you will have to get yourself up to a release higher than 10.7 or 10 to upgrade. Of course, make sure you back up that environment, especially if you have hosted services, so stuff in the data store. You can use command line tools provided with the ArcGIS data store to back up those services. And compatible ArcMap-based services like feature service and map services will actually be migrated during the upgrade, as long as, again, they have compatible data sources. And so there's no issues with the data sources provided in, like they're not using Informix or DB2 or have raster catalogs. Now, non-compatible services like geocode services, geoprocessing services, and again, mapper feature services that have unsupported data types, they will need to be republished. So for example, a geocode service, you will need to use the new create locator tools as opposed to the old create address locator tools that would have been used in ArcMap. As well, geoprocessing services, if they aren't ready for Python 3, you're going to have to get them ready for that. Now, the final point we'd like to leave you with is to consider upgrading to ArcGIS 10.9.1 before migrating to 11. Not only is 10.9.1 our long-term support release, it uses the Pro runtime by default, while providing the ArcMap runtime as a separate install. So that kind of gives you a bit of a migration path without impacting your existing environment, or at least it minimizes your current disruption. And the blog post referenced by this QR code does provide a lot more details. So we're coming to the end here, but in this webinar, Michelle and I discussed a couple of features, new features that were introduced at 10.9.1 that we didn't want you to miss, and of course some of the stuff that's new at 11.0. We talked about some updates to ArcGIS Portal and the map viewer around symbology, but also around some stuff that can simplify collaboration and administration. We spent some time on the new service webhooks, which is currently in beta, and if you are interested in taking a closer look at them, they're there, available for you to experiment with. And there are some additional information at the early adopter site if you would like to sort of log in for the beta component of it, or sign up for the beta component of it. And then, of course, some considerations for upgrading, especially with the removal of the ArcMap runtime now there at 11.0. So here are some resources we would, we want to leave you with. We definitely encourage you to sign up for some of the upcoming events. There are some training courses here that we think would be helpful based on some of the topics we discussed here, especially if you're interested in really learning a lot more about not only just ArcGIS Enterprise, but integration between our enterprise systems. And of course, there's some help topics as well that might help you get started on some of the things we discussed today. Michelle and I want to thank you for joining us. And if you do have some questions that we can't get to in the next few minutes, feel free to email us at our addresses here, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And we do love to hear from you. And we hope you'll do the survey as well, as we really enjoy your feedback. It helps us get better at what we do. And again, we appreciate it. I want to thank you, Michelle, as well, for helping me with this session. I think you did great, and I think we're ready to take a few more questions now, if there are more.
Yeah, and thank you, John, for co-hosting with me.
No
There's been a great few ones in the chat, some about webhooks, some about upgrading. We'll touch on a few for upgrading because I think we can get them out of the park quick.
Okay.
So upgrading from 10.8.1 to 11, do you have to back up hosted feature services?
I would say yes. From 10.8.1, I would say always back up your hosted feature service no matter what. It doesn't mean there's going to be anything that's going to be wrong. It's more just a best practice to ensure that if something does go wrong, that you still have them. Again, within the data store installs, there is a backup data store tool. It will be in your program files, ArcGIS data. I think it's data store, ArcGIS tools. It's one of those off the top of my head, but there is a backup data store in there. I would be using that on a regular basis, even if I wasn't upgrading. What
Definitely
else?
echo that as well. If you're on 10.8.1, do you need to upgrade to 10.9.1 before upgrading to 11?
No, you don't. It's encouraged mainly because we want you to migrate your services to the Pro API, to the Pro based service runtime without running into any real issues. If you've already been regularly using or publishing from Pro, you probably won't have an issue. But if you do have outstanding services that have been published from ArcMap, you just want to make sure that they are compatible with the new Pro runtime. For example, you're using data that is still supported, that you're not using things like DB2 or Informix or raster catalogs. But yes, you can upgrade from 10.8.1 to 11. It's just, again, we've encouraged people to start from 10.9.1 because it is presently our current long-term release. So there is a lot more time for support on that platform. But again, yes, you can upgrade from 10.8. It's really anything less than 10.7, you will need to upgrade to an intermediary step. Is there a webhook event that will send an email when it has been specified number of days since that inspection date? That's a good question, because really I can. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo here. I don't know. That is a good question, because I can hear. I'm sorry, I can hear. I can create anything into my webhook logic at the Azure Logic end. I could schedule, like, is our software going to send out an event that it's been a couple of weeks? No, we would have to send an edit or something to that data in order to fire that event. But I can definitely schedule something else that also fires the same event to my Azure Logic app, or I can write my own Azure Logic app that manages that type of workflow. But in our software itself, no, that won't be there. You would have to write something that submits an edit or an update, and then that would fire the event into the Logic app. But again, what's key to understand about webhooks here is that really there are a whole bunch of tools that allow you to incorporate or leverage or integrate other systems into your ArcGIS Enterprise environment. And that's really the idea here, is this is an integration point to manage multiple systems. Can webhooks work with Smartsheets? At this point, I'm not familiar with Smartsheets. Oh, go ahead, Michelle. Are you gonna? Oh, I'm answering it. I gotcha. Sorry. I haven't worked with Smartsheets. I apologize. I would assume so, yes, because really, if the Smartsheets supports having a HTTP, supports receiving an HTTP post with JSON text in it, and you can give it a schema that allows you to parse and extract the components out of that JSON text, then yes. Really, it's just you need something that can listen for an HTTP post and can handle the JSON message that's packaged within the payload. Use field maps. Sorry, use field maps to create a new feature and trigger the webhook. I tried Microsoft Power Automate to apply the webhook in ArcGIS Online. I mean, Power Automate is another option as well. I've used Power Automate myself, and it's worked fine. ArcGIS Online. A lot of our Logic apps and Automate, it seems to me like they are similar. They're based on similar technology. They just give you one, I think, is more focused on enterprise, another is more focused on, I mean, for me, my Power Automate environment is Office 365, and it's really just tied to my own account. But again, I've used it a bit, not as much. The Logic apps gave me a lot more, it gave me a lot more options. Personally, if I'm going to write this in production, I might look at, because I'm a Python developer by trade, and I would probably write an Azure function that is running Python code. But again, if you're not a code person, that's where Power Automate and Logic apps come in really well. I think there's another one called Integrate or Integra. I haven't played around with it too much. So I used the editor widget created by ArcGIS App Builder to create the new feature, but the webhook can't obtain the attributes of the new feature. Do you know what could be the reason? So with my own tests, I found some tools give us the ability to do the insert. So I haven't worked with this widget too much, and I would have to look at the underlying REST calls it makes to perform the insert into the data. But for example, the old map viewer, what it does is it inserts a new row, but leaves the attributes blank. And then I have to perform updates to update the attributes, which means it's actually an add for the new row and then updates for the additional attributes. The example I walked through works best if the new row is created and the actual attributes that were added were all created and added at the insert time. But if, for example, it's a multi-staged edit where the widget adds the row but doesn't actually update the attributes until a second call to update that row, then it's actually two events that occur. One is the add, the second is the update, and you have to be able to extract out of the webhook messaging not only the adds but the updates and then correspond the two. And that was a bit of a problem I had trying to put together this demonstration, that I really wanted to collect it all in a single ad. And I find the new map viewer gives me a nice new way to edit an entire row and insert it in one shot. Quick Capture obviously does that as well, but the older map viewers, again, it was a combination of an insert and update, and I had to catch both in order to make it work. If we have 10.6.1 portal, can we upgrade to 11? No, you'll have to get yourself to 10.7. I'm sorry. If I use Power Automate or Integramat flows, will I have to do any additional configurations after upgrading to Enterprise 11, or all the flows will continue to work without any problems? So at Enterprise 11, what is new is these service webhooks. So if you're using existing webhooks with ArcGIS Enterprise tied to item creation, those webhooks don't change. What it is that we just have these brand new types of webhooks that currently exist in ArcGIS Online, but didn't exist in ArcGIS Enterprise until now. And these are the ability to listen for CRUD-based events, create, read, update, and delete based events. So if you're using ArcGIS Online to capture some of that, I did notice a small change in the request I needed to make to get the updates from ArcGIS Online to ArcGIS 11. What it was in ArcGIS Online, I had to make more requests to get the updates, whereas in my ArcGIS Enterprise environment, I could do it in a single request. Now, I don't know the logic that you currently have, and it may be that it'll just work as is, but it's hard to say. I do know that there was some small changes that I had to fix my demonstration to support. And it was more just, I had to make less calls to get all the edits in Enterprise. It gave me more of them in one shot. I think we're getting close to time here. I appreciate all the questions. This is great. I mean, I love Enterprise and I love these topics, so this is fun to talk about. Please feel free to email us. We love getting your questions and we love helping out and we love hearing what you're doing with our technology. And anything, Michelle?
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great hour and a bit here, and we look forward to hearing what else are you doing with the technology. Send us all your pictures of flow lines and wavefronts.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care, okay? Have a good weekend.